You're listening to the Skylight Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Skylight Books CROWDCAST channel. We are very excited to be here tonight with Julio, Anta, and Pornsak Pichetshote. Before I introduce them to you, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Hallie. I'm the events manager at Skylight. For those of you who don't know Skylight Books, we are a general independent bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. And now, without further ado, it is my very great pleasure to introduce first Pornsak Pichetshote. Pornsak was a Thai-American rising star editor at DC's Vertigo imprint, where he worked on comics perennials such as Sandman and Swamp Thing, as well as award-winning New York Times bestsellers. His comic book debut as writer, Infidel, was a critical and commercial hit, as well as being optioned for a feature film by TriStar Pictures. His next book, The Good Asian, has launched to multiple sellouts and has been featured on 20-plus Best of the Year lists, including Entertainment Weekly, Variety, and Fortune magazine. As a TV writer, his work includes Marvel's Cloak and Dagger on Freeform, two-sentence horror stories, Light as a Feather, and the upcoming Green Lantern on HBO Max. Julio Anta is a writer based in New York City. Raised in Miami in a Cuban and Colombian family, Julio strives to tell narratively rich stories about diverse and empowered Latinx characters for readers of all ages. His debut comic book series, Home, began publication in 2021, courtesy of Image Comics. Forthcoming work includes Frontera, a YA graphic novel from Harper Alley, and Si Se Puede, a nonfiction graphic novel from 10 Speed Press. Please join me in giving them a huge virtual welcome to the stage.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, guys. Hey, everyone. Yeah. Hey, Julio. It's so funny.
Hey.
Whenever they ask you to send over those bios, you like send them along, and then you remember it's like, oh right, they read them while you have to awkwardly listen to yourself being introduced.
I was thinking I need to lengthen my bio.
Yours, I need to shorten my bio. That's like, oh my god, it keeps going and going and going. but anyway, thank you, Julio, for asking me to do this. So,
of course, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the book and all that. And I kind of remember it, and I tell this all the time to people when they talk about books and like how to pitch a book and all that sort of stuff. And I always sort of say, you have your pitch when you can pitch your book in a tweet. Like when you can pitch your book in a tweet, that's when you have like a rock solid pitch. And so much of it is like narrowing it down. And I remember like you're such a great example of that, because I remember hearing about your book in a tweet. I think it was probably an image tweet with some graphics. And as soon as I heard it, I was sold. And I'm not quite arrogant enough to pitch your book back to you. So I'm going to cowardly ask you to do it. But then I'm also really curious to see like where did the idea come from? Like did that like the germ of that tweet start first and it grew from there? Or was it something that you had a bigger thing in mind and you kind of whittled it down to how you eventually pitched it?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll kind of give the elevator pitch for the book first. Book's called Home. Like Hallie mentioned, you can order it now from Skylight. This is the trade. It has the 5 issues in it and an educator guide as well. That is good for middle school and up. And the book is a story about a young boy who is separated from his mother at the U.S.-Mexico border during the zero tolerance policy. And through all of the stresses that he's going through in his life, he starts manifesting these superhuman abilities. And then he has to learn how to deal with them and how to get back to his mother, who he's been separated with, while also being hunted by the federal government. So that's kind of the longer pitch of it. This is a book that came about from watching the news, like a lot of people in the spring of 2018, when we all learned about the zero tolerance family separation policy at the border. I was horrified, like a lot of people. For me, it felt even more personal as the son of a Cuban exile, the grandson of undocumented immigrants from Colombia, and growing up in Miami, which is this huge immigrant community from Latin America. I felt like I was seeing something that I personally hadn't seen before. And, this country obviously has, a long history of treating, immigrants, anybody that can be classified as an other, horribly, from obviously slavery to Japanese internment to Latin American immigrants at the border. But for me, this kind of felt like a new low, using the separating of families as a cruel form of deterrence at the border. Because that's ultimately what it was. That family separation wasn't advertised ahead of time. It wasn't really planned much at all. It was a switch that was flipped through executive order one day, and then that sent a message to all people who might seek asylum in the U.S., which is a legal process, to not come. To say that you're not welcome here, and we might separate you from your family if you do that. So, seeing that was just a really heartbreaking moment for me. We'd been living through a year of the Trump administration at that point, so I was already really angry. And that just felt like a new level to me. And so I kind of like, as this weird form of coping, I started just, I guess, consuming as much news and information about what was happening at the border. And along through that process, I eventually got the idea for Home. I'll never forget, I was waiting. I live in New York, waiting for the train, for the subway, and listening to a podcast on my headphones of this mother who didn't know where her child was. And, through the help of an NGO, they end up finding out that her kid, they were separated in Arizona. The kid was shipped all the way to the Bronx to a foster care center there. And with the help of the NGO, she finally tracked him down, got on the phone with him. And on the phone, and this is something that we turn into a scene in the book. In the third issue, she's telling him, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for bringing you. If I knew that this was going to happen, I would have never done it. And, these are people trying to escape desperate situations. So to say that I would have never brought you to this country, despite how bad it is where we came from, that was a really powerful thing for me. So thinking about Home, it was really, a way for me to turn this really horrible situation, these horrible feelings that I was feeling, and try to make it into something that, had some optimism to it, that gave these characters agency over their lives. Because, Juan, the main character in the book, he has no control over what's happening in his life. It's all on the whims of, these federal officials, and this new policy. So that's pretty much where the idea came from.
I'm curious, when you talk about it that way, about wanting the need to give your characters agency and the inspiration sort of for it, I'm really curious, at what part of the process did the genre element come in? Was there ever a moment where you considered doing this without sort of the genre piece? Did it come very quickly? Did you find it as an easy, as easy tool to explore certain aspects of the experience? Where did it happen as you were kind of contemplating the trying to figure out your attack on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, it came pretty early on. Because, for me, I see kind of the genesis of the superhero story, or the superhero mythos, coming from the immigrant experience. We see it in Superman, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's something that we don't see much now at all. Obviously, all racial and ethnic minorities in the U.S. are vastly underrepresented in media. But Latino people, Hispanic people are even less. We make up almost 20% of the U.S.'s population, and like 3% of on-screen representation on movies and TV. And I would say in comics, it's probably even worse.
Yeah.
We very rarely see Latino characters. It was only 10 years ago that we got Miles Morales.
Right.
And even, in the independent space, like, that's not something that we see very often. But I always had like that desire to see a Hispanic Latino person with superhuman abilities. But for this, I really wanted to kind of thread that needle of, superhero as a parallel to the immigrant experience and bring it to something that was happening, in people's lives today.
Hmm. I'm curious, and after this, I swear we will get to pitching books and the reason why everyone tuned in.
Now,
But I'm curious though, did you like what were your when I'm working on a book where there's infidel or the good Asian, there's a couple things I keep close to my desk to kind of like as little touchstones, as reminders
mhm.
of partly of the genre, partly of sort of my North Star in terms of trajectory or targets to hit. Like, were there any other comics or novels that kind of like helped inspire you, but also kind of like kind of focus you in terms of like, this is my plan of attack for this particular book?
Yeah, it's funny because I do that too. But for this book, I didn't really have much of that.
Interesting.
For this book, it was a lot of research.
Yeah.
So, it was a lot of reading local news articles
Mm,
coming out of Arizona and out of Texas. It was listening to a lot of podcasts, watching YouTube clips of,
okay.
local news coverage, interviews of what was happening during this time. And then also just like digging into the history of US immigration laws.
Mm,
A lot of it I was not familiar with.
mm,
Like I mentioned earlier, I'm from Miami, Cuban and Colombian American. My father came here when he was 5 as a Cuban exile. It's a very, I don't want to make it sound like a walk in the park, but
right.
comparative to other, other nationalities, it's a really privileged, migration process into the US.
Mm,
For a long time, as long as you set foot on the US and you were Cuban, you were set. You would get set up for staying here permanently, and there was no risk of deportation. So for me, growing up around all of these people who mostly came from that Cuban American background, I wasn't really aware of all the different, policies and laws
yeah.
and programs that were made to bring people in and then rip them apart when we didn't need their resources anymore. So for me, it was a lot of, learning for the first time how things worked at the border and how they had now changed with this new executive order of family separation. But I also grew up on comics, so I
Mm,
grew up on manga, I grew
mm,
up on anime, and then I found North American, direct market comics afterwards.
mm,
So I still have that base of like reading and watching Dragon Ball Z, which I think some of it kind of comes
yeah.
through in some of these characters. And also, reading, big Marvel event stories and reading Spider-Man and, Superman and all these different characters. So, what you mentioned earlier, I've had that process for other books, but for this one, it just felt
Interesting.
so, out of, I don't have a comp for this, a
Right.
lot of
Right.
times when you're pitching, they're like, it's this meets that. And
Yeah.
I didn't really have that for this book.
Right. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. Well, speaking
Yeah.
of sort of for this book and putting together and also like, the how we build the show and all that. I
Yeah.
did want to sort of talk about because like, I'm so grateful you asked me to do this because one of my ongoing guilts is I get DM'd all the time with people asking me, how do I get my book published at Image? How do I get publishing?
Mhm.
And it's one of those things, I'm sure you get it too. Like if you answer
Yeah.
one, it feels like you have to answer them all. And then that's your day and that's your week and that's your life pretty much. So I'm
Mhm.
really grateful to have the chance to sort of talk to you as sort of a research of how sort of people can kind of do this. And I know that you have like an interesting start because I guess you've told me before you started with sort of shorts that you put online. Is that about right?
Yeah, yeah. I started with so I'll take a little further back.
Sure.
The idea to write home was what kicked off me
Oh,
wanting to
interesting.
write comics. I
Interesting.
yeah, I hadn't written any comics. I hadn't thought
Okay.
about writing comics beyond, that thought that I think most comic readers have at some point where they're
Hmm.
like, I think I could write this.
Right.
Like, but beyond that, there wasn't any action behind it. And then I had this idea for home, and I was like, I got to make this. I have to
Mm,
figure out how to make this. And then it really just turned into this whole like research project almost for me.
mm,
Of how are comics in the direct market published? How do you pitch them? Like what are publishers looking for in pitches? What's the business of it? So for me, it was a lot of just like researching, to write the book. It was a lot of listening to podcast interviews, with creators and publishers, and just reading everything that I could to figure it out. Reading Brian Michael Bendis's book was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
I think it's called Words with Pictures.
Words for Pictures. I got it right
there.
Here.
It is.
There you go.
Nice. Yeah, it's the first like textbook on writing like modern, American direct market comics. Which I think it's important also, but like before we have this conversation, to say that that's what we're talking about. We're talking about American direct market comics, because there's also the book market, which I work in also, but it's a totally different process where, it pretty much requires having an agent. And it's also, frankly, a much more organized process.
Yeah.
Where you do get feedback pretty quickly and find out from publishers, within a month, whether or not they want to publish your book. Whereas go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, direct market comics is interesting because in the one sense, because you don't need an agent, it is a little bit more egalitarian. But on the other hand, it is complete chaos, and which I'm sure you can speak to.
No, definitely. There's publishers that answered my email months after Image,
Right.
made their offer.
Yeah.
And one of them, this is just a quick aside, was like, why didn't you tell us? You wasted our time. It's like, what do you mean? I sent a cold email 6 months ago and you never responded. But
that's
anyway,
very common to have pitches sit for like a year and then people are like, what, you gave this to me?
Yeah. But so for me, like the first step to getting published was wrapping my arms around the concept of how to pitch. What is the business of it? How does Image work? How is Image different from any other publisher, any other creator-owned publisher? So for me, I kind of started doing short stories. I saw a lot of creators advocating for that on Twitter. Instead of starting with your big opus, as a new writer, it's better to just invest in, get a little money together, write some scripts, and pay artists to, illustrate these, 4 to 10 page short stories for you. So that's what I did between, the summer of 2020 and 2021. I put out 5 short mini comics online from 4 to 10 pages each. And these are comics that I literally just reached out to artists and asked them, what's your page rate? Here's the script that I've already written. Is it something you're interested in? And then we kind of went from there. And once it was completed, I just posted it on Twitter for free and on my website for free. And the idea was, let's get it out there. Let's see if people are connecting with the kind of writing that I'm passionate about and the kinds of topics that I want to talk about. Which was kind of like almost like a beta test for what Home would become. And then also ultimately use it as proof that, yes, I'm a new writer. I've never had a book out, but here's all these shorts that I've been able to put out online for free that you can read. You can see that I can follow through with a project. And that they're, I guess subjectively from my perspective, good, I guess.
Right.
So that's where I started. And I think I recommend that for anyone. I think it's a good way to just get your feet wet, start meeting people. I met tons of comic creators just through, people that are published that I became friends with and I was able to ask questions with while doing this.
So let me ask, because just to like manage people's expectations on sort of how this works. So like, where did you find your artists? Was it on Instagram? Had they already published comics? And I'm also curious that like, how many of them responded? How many did any of them flake? Like, because that's also a really common thing when dealing with this stuff.
Yeah. So I'll say this first, a little plug. If you go to my website, julioanta.com, and you go to mini comics, you can read all 5 of them there for free still. But my first one, called Agent Mejia, that one I went on Reddit. There's a subreddit called Comic Book Collabs, I think. And I put out kind of like a little like the old newspaper ad kind of style thing. Here's my log line. I'm looking for an artist that can do maybe just like inks and gray tones over it. And it's 10 pages. Who like, is anybody interested in seeing the script? And I had a few people reach out. The first person that I hired to do it did the first page and totally just flaked and disappeared on me. And that
Which is
happened.
so common.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, these are strangers on the internet, who you have no relationship to. And you're also, to give them credit also, you're also a random writer, who has no artistic talent, trying to get your first story out there. So, it's not a particularly attractive thing for them either.
Sure.
But yeah, so he flaked. The artist that I tried to use initially for my second mini comic also flaked. But then I found people on Twitter. One of the things that was super effective for me early on was searching the hashtag comic jobs, and through that finding other posts that people made already that was like, hey, I'm looking for an artist for whatever. You and I, we both see it all the time on Twitter. And then going through all the artists that replied and seeing, does any of this kind of match what I would like to do for my story? And if it does, just reach out, email them, DM them. I feel like now more than ever, we've kind of, made it, we've kind of like leveled some of the scales of like how to get in. Because you can easily find people that are at your level or a little above your level, that might be willing to work with you, So like my main suggestion is to do that, find people using hashtags on Twitter, Instagram, and then pay them, because at the end of the day, like, people are way less likely to flake if you pay them. And also, they're taking a risk working with you. So, the best thing to do is just pay them for their work. And then hopefully you both come out with work that you're proud of.
What I love about what you just said is that you just described the experience of going to multiple conventions, meeting freelancers, going to Artist Alley, and you did it without leaving your home. Like, and because that is everyone kind of has the same story, and that's how they make comics. They, so much of making comics, and I say this all the time, that like, I don't know how, if you're interested in making a comic, I don't actually know what advice to give you. I know the advice to give you if you're interested in being a comic book creator. And, I don't know how you can just do a hit it and quit it and then go. I know how you can like have this be part of your life, and having this be part of your life means interfacing with the community, which is a fantastic community. And what I love about what you just said is that you don't have to spend all this money on plane tickets. And like, cause I'm actually curious, like since Home came out, like how many conventions have you even gone to at this point?
So I went to, and when we talk about like actually pitching Home, we'll talk more about this. But my first comic convention ever was New York Comic Con 2019.
Right.
And I went there specifically to try to cold pitch Home to publishers.
Interesting.
Which is a very humiliating experience. As it should be, to be honest. Like if I was one of these editors,
it's a fascinating thing that people expect, like, oh, and I think back in the day this used to be the case, but people expect conventions are the place to sort of pitch sort of for work. And if you're an artist, maybe you can like show your portfolio there. But for writers, every editor is so burnt out. They've been out drinking till 4 a.m. They're there with 3 hours sleep. The last thing they want to use is their critical faculties. So it's the worst time to actually approach them.
And it's also New York Comic Con. It's not like a little Comic Con,
right.
But since then, I went to the first New York Comic Con that came back, and I went to FlameCon in New York, which is a much smaller convention, in 2019. But that's it. So I guess I've been to 3.
That's
and
fascinating.
I've done way more virtual convention panels than I've done.
But that is honestly the most reassuring thing I've heard about, about creators like just in their homes trying to make comics. The fact that you did that by only going to 3 conventions, because so much of the tools are there online at this point. So, now I know the way Image works is that you have to kind of put sort of a packet together, and that's kind of what I did for my book Infidel. I found, and it was easier for me because as a former comic book editor, I could kind of reach out and get recommendations from artists and all that. I assume that you found your artist Anna Weinscheck from through the process that you did all your short stories from. Was it a case of, did she have to do, I'm curious what your pitch packet looked like.
Yeah. So my pitch packet incidentally looked a lot like your infidel pitch packet because I bought the trade
Thank you.
before
By the
I
way,
had even
I appreciate the sale.
I bought it just as a fan. So this is pre deciding that I wanted to write a comic.
Oh, cool.
And I remember when I was reading it the first time, I saw the pitch in the back and I was like, oh, this is cool, kind of like behind the scenes. But I didn't think anything else of it until I decided that I was going to make my own series that I wanted to pitch to. Image was really like, the biggest dream, but I was convinced that it wouldn't ever work there, because it was my first book. So then I remembered your pitch that was an infidel. I went back, I looked at that. And I also took a class. I think you're friends with Alex Segura also.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he works at Oni now. He's been all over the place. But he taught an online class.
Oh, cool.
Maybe it must have been in 2019 because this is before I pitched Image, where you learn how to. It's like 2 weeks, and it's all online. You learn how to pitch a comic. You learn what a pitch packet should look like. So there's lessons, but then there's also a sort of peer group review portion of it also.
Interesting.
Where everybody in the group is giving notes, including obviously Alex giving you notes on your pitch. And to me, that was super helpful. That was one of my first introductions to what a log line was.
Sure.
Which is what you mentioned about the tweet that you saw Image post.
Yeah.
Like for me, the log line comes first. It's one of these like old school, like save the cat kind of things, where in that book, he says that's like the first thing before you start writing, you need a 1-sentence explanation that hooks readers in. And then use that to guide your story, So for my pitches, I start with a log line. I then have credits for who's doing the book, all the creators. And then I have a 1-page high concept, maybe like 3 to 4 paragraphs. That really essentially it's pretty much the first issue, and it teases it. It doesn't spoil anything. It just gives you the vibe of the book. If you have comps, it says the comps. It says what audience it's for. That 1 page for me, I look at my pitches as every page is trying to get the publisher to keep reading to the next page.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing on a single page. Log lines first. And then if I can get them to be hooked on the log line, then they'll read the high concept. And I need to get them then to my full outline, which is usually a couple pages. And that's where I spoil the whole book.
Yeah.
I do an issue by issue breakdown because this was a mini series. For a longer book like yours, I don't know if you did a full outline for the whole thing. But maybe the first arc, I think, is what most people will do. And that
think
just
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying that just tells the publisher exactly what's going to happen. Yeah.
I think for both of my books, I want to say, I think the infidel pitch was in total 2 pages. And then for the Good Asian, it was a 2-page synopsis of the 10-issue sort of series. Nice. I much similar to you, I am very modular with my thinking. So I have my cover sheet is a pitch document. It starts with the log line. It goes into the concept. I think it talks about characters. Then it talks about the audience. And then I think it's sort of a bio on who we are. And then the following pages tends to be story. And I broke it down that way because as my experience as an editor, one of the things I found is that, and no writer likes to hear this, but in a lot of ways, the story is almost the last thing that you want to read as an editor, because the story in a weird way is the math. This is how I am going to execute everything I promise. And so much the cover page is there what I'm promising. And it's meant, and that thing, it's modular in such a way so that it is meant to tell the editor who's overworked and underpaid, these are the things that you need to convince your boss of why we should publish it. And then the story pages are almost, this is how I'm going to execute all the things I promise you in a way that still has a little bit of class and integrity. And so I have a very similar sort of process to you in that case. I am curious too, did you have sample pages,
Yes.
design sketches when you pitched the image?
Yeah, so when I pitched Home in particular, the first page was actually the cover of the first issue, which is the cover of the trade. So I had, and now this isn't something that I do anymore with my pitches moving forward, because I try to, especially when you're working like in a creator-owned situation where you and your artists are co-creators and you're all essentially working on spec until you sell the book. I try to put the least amount of burden on the artist. But for the home pitch, I had the cover of the first issue with the logo already on it, that I had paid to be designed. And then we had 8 completed sample pages, which is also the first 8 pages of the first issue. It doesn't have to be the first pages. I've done pitches now where, it's kind of like the hook of the book, and not necessarily, the setup, the first 8 pages. But yeah, so we definitely had sample pages. I think that's one of the most important parts of the book because it shows them what it's going to look like exactly. And I know for Image, that's a huge thing. They want you to have sample pages, but also sample pages where every single person that is on your creative team is on these pages. They don't want you to switch up the color or the letterer later on. But yeah, so we had those 8 sample pages.
That's cool. That's really cool. So now once you had the pitch document together, about how many pages would you say it was total?
It was cover, high concept page, a character page, 2 synopsis pages, and then the 8, so 13 pages total.
13 pages total. And then, so did you, now the process came about you pitching it to publishers. How did it work for you? Did you say, hey, I'm going to give someone an exclusive window? Did you go all at once? Because like you say, publishers can take years to get back to you, especially in comics. So it gets a little bit confusing of like, well, how do I want to handle this?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because that brings me back to the book market really quick, where I do exclusive windows with my agent for, a publisher that I've worked with already. I want to work with them again. Hey, here's the full pitch. Get back to us in 2 weeks and tell us if you want it. In the direct market, I personally haven't had that experience. So when I decided that, the pitch was done, I was done polishing it. Honest pages were done. They were colored and lettered. I just started. So that brings me back to the Comic-Con story. I went to New York City Comic-Con in 2019, and kind of, I had my list of editors that I thought would be a good fit for Home based off of the other books that they had credits on. And I started kind of, on Google Images, matching the faces to the names to try to like find the person at the booth, and just started approaching them and said like, hey, I have this pitch I'd love to share with you. Is like, what's the best way to share it with you? And they're like, oh, tell me a little bit about it. That's usually like the natural response to that. And I told them, and I also like had an iPad with the pitch on it, and offered to email it. And most of the people, honestly, and I don't hold it against them at all, really just like listened and nodded and then said it was too political for them, or like, we're not really picking up books right now, even though I knew that they were because of other friends I had.
Sure.
But eventually, it led me to I don't know if I've ever shared this entire story, but it led me to the Image booth to talk to Elena Salcedo from Top Cow. She was one of those people that I wanted to pitch. And most people hearing this that are familiar with Top Cow will think like that it doesn't make sense. Why were you pitching Top Cow? But I didn't really have that awareness at the time.
Sure.
But it ended up being like my in to Image proper, because she loved the pitch, and she wanted to share it with Eric at Image. She actually tried to find him like in that moment to show him.
Cool.
That's how enthusiastic she was about it. But he wasn't around, so she just said like, hey, email it to me. I'm going to forward it to him. And that's how it happened, and then one day, I got a single email from Eric saying that they were down for it and they wanted to publish it.
That's so cool.
So that's my story. It's not really like easy to replicate.
Sure.
But like for me, I think it kind of speaks to like, like the hustle of like pitching things, and also being ready, because like I could have
Yeah.
showed it to Elena and it may not have been good enough. It may not have looked professional enough. And
Yeah.
that would have been the end of the story,
I love
So
your
yeah.
story because it's also such a great sort of like working example of almost like the serial killer type of obsession it takes to kind of attack a publisher and get them and to sort of just get your book published. And I think it's really, really great because it really does sort of take
Yeah.
that focus and sort of all that homework as well. So now after Image, the place like Image happens, I'm really curious because I think everyone does it slightly differently.
Mhm.
What were the big tools to sort of promote your work? Because Image does a great job sort of promoting, but I've also known from experience that Image works best as sort of as a speaker. It's an amplifier. So like whatever noise you put out there, they do a really great job amplifying that noise to a much greater level. The less you put in, the less they're able to work with. So I'm really curious what were the models, the modes that you use to sort of like promote your book?
Yeah, so the context of the book coming out. So I mentioned this is New York Comic Con 2019. So
Yep.
this is like October, November 2019. They end up, saying we're 100% going to do this in February 2020.
Okay.
We're a month away from the pandemic happening.
Yeah.
And then the book, for those of you who are familiar with it, the first issue doesn't come out until April 2021. And not because we weren't ready. It's because, obviously everybody shut down, and then all these books that were going to launch got pushed back. So what my answer is going to be in the context of the pandemic.
Sure.
So there was two things. There's an online component and there's an in-person component to it. Now, when I was thinking about launching this book pre-pandemic, I was thinking about going to, reaching out to comic shops. I live in New York. Reaching out to comic shops within an hour, 2-hour drive, and offering to do as many signings as people will have me. Me, someone who it's my first book, not that attractive for them, but just like willing to, put the work out to get the word out for the book. That obviously doesn't happen because of the pandemic. But what I did start doing is I reached out before FOC. I reached out to every single comic book shop in New York City, which we have a lot of them, from the big ones like Midtown Comics to really small, local mom and pop shops. And I told them that, comics come out on Wednesday. I will be there on Monday, on Tuesday, whenever you get your diamond shipment, and I will sign every single copy of the book that you order. And that to me, I think was super effective because we saw orders in those shops, like just anecdotally from what they said. And then also what I got from Images, like metrics, we saw those numbers just skyrocket. And every single one of those shops on that Monday or Tuesday that I went in and signed the copies that they had, posted about it on their social medias.
That's cool.
To tell people like, hey, if you come in and you buy this book home, it'll be signed on the rack for you. So for me, that was, I think that was like a big incentive. Obviously that's only shops in New York City.
Sure.
So there's a limit to how effective that is. But then the online component was I went on comicbookroundup.com. And I use that as like a directory for who reviews comic books.
Right.
And then I also I used titles that were, similar in a way. Infidel was one of them, where I looked up Infidel and I looked who were all the people who reviewed Infidel.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Because I figured like, okay, this is a book that, deals with social issues. If somebody is willing to review it and enjoy it and review it well, then maybe they're willing to take a chance on this book that is admittedly, political, and they're not just going to brush it off.
Right.
So I use books like that, books like Miles Morales comics, and a bunch of other stuff. And I built a spreadsheet for myself that was just a directory of what's the website, what's the name of the reviewer. I just like, if their email wasn't, easily found, I looked on their Twitter to see if I could find their email. I use this weird program that pulls emails out of LinkedIn accounts.
Oh, wow.
And I just like built this database to then, create an email that was like 2 paragraphs long, really short,
Right.
that said like, hey, this is the pitch for my book. Here's a PDF to download it. And here's when it comes out, if you're interested in doing a review. And then also invited them like, and if you're really interested and you want to do an interview too, I'd love to do that as well. And I just like sent off all these emails to people.
Did you do that before or after FOC, which for people who aren't in the comics biz, that's the final order cutoff, which is pretty much where all your orders have to kind of come in, and then they set your print run with orders that come in before then. But having said that, that's usually 3 weeks before the actual issue comes out. So I'm curious, did you do your outreach before that final order cutoff date, where stores could still order more, or was it after that?
It was before.
Okay.
But also like I tried to have like this sweet spot where I did it like 6 weeks before the issue came out.
Okay.
Because at the time I didn't know like what the pipeline was for reviews.
Yeah.
Now also like most publishers like Image, they send out all of their issues every week to reviewers. But it's easy to get lost in that. So like I literally had some people responding to me saying, oh, Image is going to send it to me, but thanks for giving me the heads up. I'm definitely going to review it.
That's so interesting.
So like right now, if you go on Comic Book Roundup and you look up Home, for that first issue, you'll see we had a huge amount of places that reviewed it. And I think that because they usually come out like a day or two, like the Monday or Tuesday before the issue comes out. I think that contributed to selling out on the first day. And triggering that reprint for us, which was then a new headline and press release that could go out. So for me, I kind of just like built this thing for myself that didn't exist, and then used that as a way to market it. And then I kept using it for every issue, especially the people that did review it. I thanked them for reviewing it, obviously, and then said, oh, here's issue 2 if you want to read it right now. Cool. And then there's people who reviewed all 5 issues throughout the entire run. So for me, that was a big way of promoting it. But then also the last part of it was reaching out to people like you, other comic creators that I respect and who I think other people respect. And I sent you the first issue. I sent you the first 3 issues maybe. Asked you to just read it. And then when you said that you were into it, I asked you for a pull quote. And you very graciously sent that. So that was something that I could post on social media also, and that Image could use to promote it. So I think that was a big thing also, to just expose people who follow you that have no idea who I am to the book for the first time.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I have a ton of other questions. I know that it's around now that we promised to open things up to a Q&A. So but if no one has questions, I will selfishly ask mine.
We have a great question from Peter, but just one question so far. So if anyone else has questions, ask them now. This has been an incredibly valuable resource for comic book creators. So I just want to quickly say thank you. Okay, so he's asking, with the 8 sample pages you had, did you pay the art team out of your own pocket for them to do the sample pages? And then do you sign a contract / agreement with them that you and the artist are 50-50 co-creators if the project gets published? So I guess what's kind of the breakdown of that?
Yeah. So, every situation is different. But yeah, for that book, because it was my first book ever, I did pay everybody out of my own pocket. And then, and we didn't, when I think of the order of events, I don't think we signed anything until we had the deal from Image. But we did have, in principle, we had, through email decided what the arrangement was going to be. But now, I think that maybe one more pitch I paid out of pocket to do the sample pages. But then, the really nice thing once you're published, especially by a publisher like Image, there's kind of like a credibility that gets added to that, where you also at that point have met a lot of artists that maybe really liked your book already and are interested in working with you. And the burden of the financial burden gets taken off of you, and you both, like I mentioned earlier, just decide all right, we're both going to work on this on spec. And then if a publisher is interested and we sell it, then we'll both be 50-50 co-creators on it. But for your first stuff, like that's probably the best way to go about it, to just pay out of pocket.
I'm going to do a follow-up quickly to that before anyone else asks any more questions. When you got Anna's art, you have a fantastic team sort of, working with you guys. You got Brian Valenza on colors. You got Hassan Otsman Elhau on letters. Did they come from Anna? Did they come from you? Like, how did you bring your team together?
They all came from me. So,
Okay.
Hassan, for example, he lettered all of my mini comics that I talked about before.
Okay.
So he was already somebody that that I, kind of had in my back pocket that
Wow.
I could always reach out to and pay him to letter my books. Brian was someone that I don't remember what book it was, but I ran into his colors reading a book. Reading another comic, and I love them, and I thought that they would be a great fit for Anna's art. And if you look at the book, I think it adds another level. I feel like they're both leveling each other up in this book. And he's somebody I just cold emailed, I think I cold emailed him.
That's so cool.
And just reached out to him. So I kind of again, like I said, first book, first pitch, I really took on the burden of assembling the team, paying everybody their rates, so they wouldn't feel like they were taking a big risk on me. But then, things change. Generally you are paying a color and a letterer all the time, up front. But that now things have changed. I have artists that I've worked with multiple times now, that we just love working with each other, and we know, that we can both trust each other to just work on this and then see if any publishers are interested.
The thing I love that you said too is that it's something I've been talking about forever, and it's great to sort of watch people do it, is that you really do kind of have an indie filmmaker's sort of like perspective on sort of making comics. And part of that is, as a comic book writer, you're in a weird way, you're acting like an indie film director, which also means you have to be a producer as well. And it also means in your particular case, you have to be an editor as well. So you are putting people together. You're seeing like, oh, this person would be really good with this artist, and sort of, synthesizing all that stuff. Also, I'm like so impressed you got Haas that early for your mini comics, because I love his work, and he's like one of the best guys.
He's the best. I literally haven't used anyone else. The only time
why would you need to?
The only time my work has been lettered by someone else is the Marvel book that I did, because they have their own thing. But like, he's my go-to person. He's a great letterer, and he's great to work with too. He's such a nice guy.
I love that that also what I'm getting from this is that you just have to go for it. You just have to put any hesitancy aside and just like send those emails, reach out to people. I love that. Another question from John L, who says, what was the name of the 2-week comic writing class you mentioned? And I'll open that up maybe and just say, are there other classes or teachers or anything you would recommend?
Yeah, so it's Alex Segura. I'll just put it in the chat just so people know how to spell it. And it was a comic pitching class. So it really didn't focus at all on how to write comics. It was focused on how to write a pitch that is attractive to publishers and that looks professional. Because if you're an editor, like Pornsak, you were an editor, you can tell who knows what they're doing. And not just format, because everybody might have a different format, but just like getting the information that needs to be in that across to the editor. But as far as other resources, I would say the book that Pornsak showed by Brian Michael Bendis is a great first thing to read about learning how to write comics and work in comics. It might be a little outdated now with some of the things, but I think it's a great first resource. For me also, just like a lot of screenwriting stuff was great for just learning how to write. I really, obviously 3x structure is, a big thing in almost every story. But I also really I mentioned earlier, Save the Cat. I don't use it as a formula. I use it more as, do I have all the pieces in place in my story? And a lot of those things become second nature to you. But I use it to see okay, why isn't this working? Is it because I don't have, this tease here. I have nothing, no mid reversal or something, so it kind of just helps me like get my stories into better shape.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Julio was saying, I think Brian offers a class through Portland University that he teaches as well, which I don't know if you have to be in person for that. In this virtual world, maybe you don't. So that's something to sort of look into. I believe he teaches it with David Walker, although I think David Walker's on hiatus right now. But I think Brian and I can't remember actually who he's co-teaching it with anymore. But there's that. Another book in terms of things that help you when you have a story working, but it's not quite 100% there yet. You're not quite sure. But Robert McKee's book Story actually is I found really helpful for stuff like that. I generally find screenwriting books not that helpful when it's a blank page in front of you, because then you'll just get in your head about like, well, the book told me to do this and the book told me to do that. But once you have something out there, this sort of unsculpted, unrefined thing, a lot of these books, Save the Cat being one of them, Robert McKee's Story being another, I found very helpful to be like, oh, this is why this only feels like it's kind of working and not fully working, and it helps you articulate a lot of those ideas, I find anyway.
I have two more things that I'd recommend. One, Scott Snyder has a comic book writing class.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Which and like this is also like something I think is important for people. I'm published. I've written a few books already. I still know that I don't know a lot. So like I'm taking his writing class right now.
Cool.
And it's super helpful. It's super cheap. It's like $7 a month or something. And you get the whole, library of all of the classes that he's done already over like the last 6 months. It's on Substack. I definitely recommend that. But something I thought about when you were talking about like ideas and how these writing books are more so about refining what you have, but they don't give you the ideas. I'm a big like one of my creative, I don't know, like heroes or North Stars is David Lynch. And I love his films. I love just like his attitude about creativity and making art. And one of the things that he talks about a lot is making sure that you have room to dream these ideas.
Yeah.
It sounds a little corny, but he sees ideas as these things that just exist out there and they're just waiting for you to find them, and it's kind of like a more spiritual way of talking about it that I don't necessarily buy into. But I do think there's certain things like, there's things in the zeitgeist that are out there, right? Every once in a while you see the same idea prop up in a bunch of different mediums at the same time, but I think it's important to give yourself space to just think about things, to engage in other material that's not just comics if you want to be a comic book writer. Watch TV shows, read novels, just engage with the world in a way where you see that, oh, maybe there's an angle here where I can use it to talk about something that's important to me, that means something to me. A lot of my mini comics were about, and Home also, about things that just like made me angry, and trying to find a way to wrestle with that in a unique way and in a way that maybe puts it in front of people and makes them think about it in a way that they hadn't before. But a lot of that is really me just sitting down and just thinking about the idea and imagining, what if I open this door? What if I open that door? And I just let myself go in all these directions that might seem crazy at the time. And 90% of them don't work and are too crazy, but then you might find some of them that do work and that you hadn't thought about. And I think it's just giving yourself like being vulnerable to going in different directions and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, the whole creative culling thing is such an interesting process. I was just watching the cartoonist KFab YouTube channel, and they have an interview with Brian K. Vaughan. And Brian apparently does a 2.5-hour walk every day. And it's just him, just like he takes his dog out and he just goes out for a walk. He doesn't have a notebook with him. He doesn't take any notes down. He uses a process I call idea Darwinism, which is just basically you think stuff, and the stuff that you remember is the stuff that's worth remembering. And if you don't remember it, it's not worth remembering. And so he has this great story actually of like Saga. He has Saga planned out to like 108 issues, and none of it's written down. And so he tells his wife, just like, if I get hit by a car, this is how the book will end. And then every couple months he'll quiz his wife, and he'll be like, no, you got it wrong. People care about this. People care about this. So yeah, but that's but Stephen King talks about and I picked it up from Stephen King has a great book called On Writing. I'm just gonna sell books here apparently, but Stephen King has a book called On Writing. Yeah, buy it at Skylight. But he talks a lot.
Doing my job.
I know, right? He talks a lot about just like the help of the good help of walk can kind of give. I know Aaron Sorkin takes like 6 showers a day to kind of. There's something about like that motor, doing something, some basic motor skills which kind of jog ideas. But all that sort of stuff that just kind of the thing I also love about King's book too, and I know a lot of writers have talked about it, is it's also a great philosophy about writing that he that he offers. His whole concept of your writing desk belongs in the corner of your office and not the center of your office, as a metaphor for how its place in your life, I think is also really great as well. But yeah, and also too, do I have I might have a copy. Okay, my last plug, I guess it would be Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is also, you just can't talk about like writing comics without. And also it's a book that's now taught in like film classes because it's just such a good way of talking about, visual storytelling.
Definitely.
I'll also plug the book Home. Everyone should buy it. My segue. Yay. It's incredible.
And Pornsak's books as well.
Yeah.
Good Asian Volume 1 is out, right?
Yes, Good Asian Volume 1 is out. I will plug Infidel only first because it is, I do, like Julio mentioned, I do have the pitch that we did a 16-page pitch packet, and so the entire 16-page pitch packet is in the back of the book, so you can actually see what a pitch looks like. My latest book out is The Good Asian, Volume 1. Volume 2 comes out in mid-May, and I will be including, I think it's going to be a regular thing now for my Image books, is that in the concluding volume, if it's more than one volume, I will include the entire pitch, the pitch packet that got that book greenlit. And just so that, because you can go online and find a lot of scripts, the actual pitches are a lot harder to find. And so when I was pitching mine, I went, as a former comic book editor, I had friends in the industry, and I could go to them and be like, what did you do? So like, I got my pitch packet. I know the writers, Jody Lehup and Sebastian Gerner, had a book called Shirtless Bear Fighter. And I pulled from their pitch document quite a bit to sort of make my pitch document. And it's one of those things that I feel like is a little less out there in the world. And hopefully it's a tool, I wanted to kind of make it a tradition so that you kind of, I like the idea of open source storytelling, so that, once I'm done with my stories, I leave my homework there for people to find in terms of how I did it, so they can, go about their own paths to do it. But yeah, so that, yes, if you're interested in that pitch document, that will be in the second volume of The Good Asian, and what the pitch packet looked like for Infidel is in the back of that.
Thank you both so much for being here. I also want to mention to everyone who's watching that this is recorded. So feel free to share it at the same link, or come back and watch it again. Buy the book from Skylight, or at the very least from your independent bookstore. We appreciate you a lot for being here. And a big thank you to Julio and Pornsak for that incredible conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com, and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.